In the golden age of the National Wrestling Alliance, few stars were a bigger draw than Wahoo McDaniel. He was a former pro football player known for being one of the toughest guys in a sport filled with them. He was a 5-time U.S. champion, a main eventer everywhere he went, and a guy fans paid good money to see. His legendary matches with Ric Flair sold out arenas and made a fortune for Jim Crockett Promotions. Wahoo was a warrior in every sense of the word, earning respect with every bone-jarring chop and every bloody battle. He had the credibility, the drawing power, and a fanatical following that all screamed, "World Champion!" He had everything the NWA could possibly want in a champion. Except their trust. So, why was the NWA's biggest star never given their ultimate prize? It's a story of politics, power, and outright betrayal. To really get how big Wahoo McDaniel was, you have to understand the era he dominated. Long before the slick, corporate machine of modern wrestling, the business was a gritty, regional hustle. Promoters and territories all across the country, loosely connected under the NWA banner, lived and died by their ability to draw a paying crowd. And to draw a crowd, you needed a star people truly believed in. Edward Wahoo McDaniel was that star. His journey didn't start in the ring, but on the football field. A standout linebacker at the University of Oklahoma, Wahoo was drafted into the AFL in 1960. He played for the Oilers, Broncos, Jets, and Dolphins, and earned a reputation as one of the hardest hitters in the league. Quarterback Lynn Dawson once said the hardest he was ever hit was by Wahoo McDaniel. This wasn't some fake wrestling backstory. It was a real career that gave him an aura of authenticity you just can't script. When Wahoo stepped into a wrestling ring, fans knew they were looking at the real deal. He went full-time into wrestling in 1969, and he brought that same raw intensity with him. His style wasn't pretty. It was a straight-up brawl. It was stiff, it was hard-hitting, and it was punctuated by his signature weapon, the tomahawk chop. These weren't the theatrical chops you see today. A chop from Wahoo sounded like a rifle shot and left welts on his opponent's chests that looked like they'd been branded. His feud with Johnny Valentine is legendary, and the sheer force of their punches and chops is still talked about today. This raw, believable style connected with the blue-collar crowds of the territories. They saw a fighter in Wahoo, a man who would stand his ground, and they absolutely loved him for it. And because they loved him, they paid to see him. In an era where ticket sales were everything, Wahoo was a guaranteed moneymaker. He was a main event draw in every major NWA territory, from Florida to Georgia to the Mid-Atlantic. His feuds with superstar Billy Graham in the AWA and Dory Funk Jr. for the NWA World title sold out buildings. He was the kind of guy you could build a whole territory around. Most importantly, he was a 5-time NWA United States heavyweight champion. Now, you have to understand, the U.S. title in Jim Crockett Promotions wasn't some mid-card belt. It was the Workhorse Championship. It was the Workhorse Championship. It was the symbol that you were the #1 contender for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship, the coveted 10 pounds of gold. Holding the U.S. title meant you were next in line. Wahoo held that golden ticket 5 different times. He was the undisputed king of the mountain, staring at the very peak, yet he was never allowed to take that final step. With a resume like that, a legit sports background, proven drawing power, and multiple reigns as the top contender, the question just gets louder. Why was the NWA World Heavyweight Championship always kept out of his reach? Now, there is a theory that maybe Wahoo himself didn't want the brutal schedule that came with being the NWA World Champion. The champ was a traveling king, defending the title across dozens of territories, from the Carolinas to Japan, often wrestling 7 nights a week. It was exhausting. Some historians suggest Wahoo preferred the freedom of being a top guy in one territory, letting him move around and have more control over his life. And while that sounds reasonable, the evidence just doesn't back it up. A closer look at the NWA's politics, especially between 1981 and 1984, paints a very different picture. It tells a story of a system that seemed to be actively working against its own biggest star. The NWA Championship Committee was notoriously political. They wanted a champion who had a certain corporate image, someone they saw as reliable. The champion was their ambassador, and they needed a guy they could control, someone who would represent the alliance without making waves. Wahoo McDaniel was a proud, independent man who played by his own rules. And it seems the powers that be decided that no matter how great he was, no matter how much money he drew, he just wasn't someone they could trust with the big prize. They were about to prove it, not by denying him opportunities, but by snatching them away after he'd already earned them. The first clear sign of trouble came in 1981. Wahoo returned to the Mid-Atlantic Territory and, in a brutal match in Greensboro, North Carolina, beat Rowdy Roddy Piper for the United States Championship. Piper, ever the schemer, had a special return clause in the contract, giving him only 20 days for a rematch instead of the usual 30. Wahoo was ready to go, but Piper, strangely, just waited. Days turned into weeks. Piper stayed quiet, letting the clock tick down. Then, with just 2 days left on the clock, the trap was sprung. During a TV taping, while Wahoo was wrestling a preliminary guy named Jacques Goulet, Abdullah the Butcher stormed the ring. Paid off by Piper, the madman from the Sudan viciously attacked Wahoo, carving up his forehead with a foreign object. It was so bloody that local TV stations were flooded with complaints. Wahoo was legitimately injured, hospitalized, and couldn't compete in his scheduled defense against Piper later that night. Piper's plan worked perfectly. He immediately went to the NWA, claiming Wahoo had failed to give him his contractually obligated rematch in time. And the NWA made a stunning ruling. They agreed with Piper. Even though Piper had orchestrated the very attack that put Wahoo in the hospital, and Wahoo was signed and ready to wrestle that night, they stripped him of the championship on a technicality. Wahoo had lost his title not in the ring, but in a boardroom. To make matters worse, while the NWA acknowledged Piper's dirty work by not just handing him the title, they held the championship up and scheduled a tournament to crown a new champion. In a final, vindictive twist, Wahoo was barred from even entering that tournament because of the brawls he got into with Abdullah while seeking revenge. It was a highly questionable decision, but one detail says it all. No full board meeting was ever called to review what happened. The NWA just made a ruling and moved on. For Wahoo, and for the fans who watched him get ambushed, it felt like a total injustice. It was the first sign that the system itself might be rigged against him. Less than a year later, it happened again. But this time it was even more obvious. Wahoo, who had left the area in frustration, came back in April of 1982. The new U.S. champion was the imposing Sergeant Slaughter, who had won the very tournament Wahoo was banned from. Wahoo immediately went after the title he felt was still his, and on May 21, 1982, in Richmond, Virginia, he beat Slaughter to win the U.S. title for a second time. It was a sweet moment of redemption, but it didn't last long. Right after Wahoo's victory, the NWA made a bizarre announcement. They were putting a new, temporary rule in place. This rule stated that a champion would have to forfeit his title if he was unable to defend it for any reason. The timing couldn't have been more suspicious, and the wording was absolute. No excuses, no exceptions. With this convenient new rule in place, Sergeant Slaughter went into his rematch with Wahoo with a clear mission. During the match, Slaughter deliberately injured Wahoo. The injury was bad enough that when it was time for another required rematch, Wahoo was once again physically unable to compete. Just like with Piper, the challenger had taken the champion out. But now, with their handy new rule in effect, the NWA knew exactly what to do. They awarded the title to Sergeant Slaughter by forfeit. Wahoo had been stripped of the championship for the second time in less than a year, under a rule that seemed created specifically for that situation. And to make the whole thing look even more like a setup, once the title was back on Slaughter, the NWA decided not to renew the rule. It had served its purpose. And just like the first time, no full NWA board meeting was called to review the decision. This wasn't a coincidence anymore. It was a message. Twice, Wahoo McDaniel had earned the #1 contendership, and twice, the NWA had used boardroom tricks and political games to take it from him. The third and final betrayal happened in the summer of 1984. This was the one that finally broke him. It exposed the NWA's hypocrisy so blatantly that it left no doubt in Wahoo's mind. There was a conspiracy to keep him away from the World Championship. By 1984, Wahoo was getting more and more frustrated. He felt that the NWA World Champion, his supposed friend Ric Flair, was ducking him. To force Flair's hand, Wahoo knew he needed the U.S. title again. The champion at the time was another fan favorite, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. Wahoo challenged his friend, and on June 24, 1984, in Greensboro, the two heroes met for the championship. The match was a classic competitive battle. But then, a third man got involved, the arrogant, rising star, Tully Blanchard. Blanchard, who had his own problems with Wahoo, stormed the ring with a steel chair, aiming to knock Wahoo's head off. Wahoo saw him coming, ducked, and the chair crashed right into Ricky Steamboat, knocking him out cold. After chasing Blanchard from the ring, Wahoo turned around to see Steamboat flat on his back. Not knowing exactly what happened, he did what any wrestler is trained to do. He covered his opponent. The dazed ref counted 1, 2, 3, and Wahoo McDaniel was the U.S. champion for a fourth time. It was a controversial win, but a win nonetheless. This time, however, the NWA's reaction was completely different. Suddenly, the same organization that had looked the other way during the Piper and Slaughter conspiracies sprang into action. This time, NWA President Bob Geigel called a full board meeting to review the tape. This time, they decided that the outside interference was enough to overturn the decision. On July 14, 1984, a date that became Wahoo's personal Black Saturday, the NWA announced their verdict. Wahoo McDaniel was stripped of the United States Championship. The hypocrisy was unbelievable. They ignored blatant, premeditated attacks by villains like Piper and Slaughter, but when the hero Wahoo won, even if it was under weird circumstances, they called in the entire board to take the title from him. For Wahoo, the picture was now perfectly clear. He believed there was a conspiracy involving Ric Flair, Bob Geigel, and promoter Jim Crockett to keep him from the world title. He figured that by stripping him of the U.S. title, he was no longer the mandatory #1 contender, letting Flair avoid a dangerous challenge. His suspicions seemed to be confirmed when Flair told an announcer the NWA had made a wise move. An enraged Wahoo shot back on TV, seething that Flair wouldn't think it was so wise if it had been his title on the line. 3 times he had climbed the mountain, and 3 times the system had thrown him off. He was done. The betrayal of Black Saturday was the last straw. The repeated injustices, the NWA board's hypocrisy, and the feeling that his friend Ric Flair was actively working against him pushed Wahoo McDaniel over the edge. In the summer of 1984, one of the most beloved heroes in Jim Crockett Promotions history did the unthinkable. He turned his back on the fans. This wasn't a cool catchphrase spouting heel turn. This was the raw, bitter transformation of a proud man who'd been pushed too far. Wahoo felt betrayed not just by the NWA, but by the fans he felt sided with Steamboat and didn't see the injustice he'd been through. He declared that if his fans could desert him overnight, they were never really his fans to begin with. His fury was real. He joined forces with the man who had started the whole mess, Tully Blanchard, forming a partnership known as the Awesome Twosome. Wahoo's style in the ring became even more brutal. He wasn't just a tough brawler anymore. He was a man on a mission to punish people. His legendary chops became weapons of pure malice. According to manager Jim Cornette, during this time, if fans in the Carolinas tried to attack Wahoo at ringside, he wouldn't hesitate to light them up with those chops, sending them flying over rows of chairs. He was on a rampage, determined to make the NWA, his opponents, and the fans pay for what he saw as their disloyalty. This new, venomous attitude fueled some of the most intense feuds of the era. He went to war with top fan favorites like Dusty Rhodes, Barry Windham, and the man at the center of it all, Ricky Steamboat. And in a moment of supreme, defiant victory, when the NWA held a tournament on October 7, 1984, to fill the vacant U.S. title, Wahoo tore through the competition, beating Manny Fernandez in the finals to once again become the United States champion. He had his title back, but he'd lost his soul to get it. He was no longer the people's champion. He was a bitter king reigning over a kingdom he now despised. Wahoo McDaniel's career is one of wrestling's most compelling what-if stories. He was everything a promotion could ever want. He had legitimate toughness forged on the pro football field, a fierce and believable style that audiences loved, and the star power to sell out arenas against anyone. His feuds with Ric Flair, Harley Race, and Sergeant Slaughter are the stuff of legend, making huge money and defining an entire era of wrestling. And yet, for all he accomplished, the ultimate prize was always kept just out of reach. He held the key to the kingdom 5 times, but was never allowed to open the door. Whether it was because of genuine concern over his independent streak, the political games of a champion looking to avoid him, or a more subtle prejudice against a proud Native American performer in a business run by a select few, the result was the same. Wahoo McDaniel's story is a masterclass in what happens when undeniable talent hits an unbreakable political wall. The system didn't just deny him a world title, it betrayed him so badly that it turned a beloved hero into a bitter villain. It was a tragedy not just for Wahoo, but for the fans who were robbed of what could have been one of the most legitimate and celebrated NWA World Championship reigns in history. Wahoo's legacy is a testament to his greatness, but it's also a cautionary tale about the dark side of wrestling, where sometimes talent and drawing power just aren't enough to beat the politics of the boardroom. Despite never holding the NWA World title, Wahoo McDaniel was inducted into the WCW Hall of Fame, the NWA Hall of Fame, and the WWE Hall of Fame's Legacy Wing. That alone tells you how huge his impact on the sport was. His story really makes you wonder about the invisible barriers that can stand in the way of success. So what do you think? Was the NWA right to be cautious and protect their top prize from a guy they saw as a risk? Or did they commit one of wrestling's greatest sins by robbing the fans and Wahoo himself of a legendary championship reign that never was? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this look back at wrestling history, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell for more stories from the golden age of the squared circle.